When the collective project that I was a part of for 6 years fell apart, I started listening to podcasts. I noticed that people who are new to movement often try to reinvent the wheel. Like, how do I personally figure out prison abolition? Or why is nobody talking about X, Y, Z when there's so much that can be learned from elders and lifelong organizers who have made X, Y, and Z their life's work? When I was experiencing burnout, I figured I was probably not the first person to ever experience burnout. I became a regular listener of facilitator Adrienne Marie Brown's podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, which was about learning from Apocalypse and from Octavia Butler, and organizer Caitlin Breedlove's Fortification podcast, which interviewed seasoned organizers about what sustains them spiritually. I wanted to hear from voices who have stayed in movement for a long time, to learn how movement veterans have navigated challenging situations and stayed with the trouble. In United in Anger, former ACT UP member Maxine Wolf describes ACT UP as a combination of serious politics and joyful living. That combination, she says, is what you need in order to continue. Other activists in this documentary echo this sentiment, citing ACT UP as being very sexy in its loudness and theatric nature and lack of compromise, a space for political action, as well as for flirting and cruising. In an era of AIDS-related homophobia and sex panic, ACT UP refused to sacrifice pleasure and exuberant collective expression in order to present a respectable, perfect victim narrative. Similarly, at the end of Whose Streets, following the non-indictment of Darren Wilson for the murder of Michael Brown, Ferguson activist Brittany Farrell answers that what keeps her in movement is a burning desire and vision and feeling and love and passion about liberation. Her voice is played over the footage of activists hugging, laughing, holding each other close. One of the most inspiring movement leaders and elders that I've been lucky enough to encounter is Ceyenne Doroshow, the founder of GLITS, Gays and Lesbians Living in a Transgender Society, which advocates for health and housing needs of trans sex workers from an abolitionist harm reduction perspective. As Eric Stanley writes in Captive Genders, prison abolition must be a center of queer and trans liberation struggle because among the most volatile points of contact between state violence and one's body is the domain of gender. Trans people are disproportionately incarcerated in relation to non-trans people, not only because the state is a gender securitizing apparatus that punishes deviance, but also because lack of access to housing, resources, and stable employment regularly funnels trans and gender nonconforming people into criminalized economies such as sex work, and then into the prison system. By advocating for and providing health, housing, and resources, GLITS works to interrupt this mechanism. Doroshow herself is open about being a Black, trans, formerly homeless sex worker, and is thus intimately familiar with the work. GLITS is not a charity organization, nor is it part of a nonprofit industrial complex. As Dean Spade writes in Solidarity, Not Charity, resistant left movements must change material conditions by strategies such as working to directly provide for people targeted by harmful systems and building alternative infrastructures through which people can get their needs met. GLITS does this through providing career trainings, housing and clothing referrals, trans dignity post-release kits, and asylum, relocation, and physical and mental health referrals for queer and trans asylum seekers. On top of all this, Doroshow is one of the warmest, funniest people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. She's always there for her community, whether in the march or on the dance floor. She foregrounds material support as well as joy and pleasure and celebration, and she doesn't compromise who she is. Last summer, GLITS launched a fundraising campaign, which ended up raising $1 million. GLITS was already providing temporary housing for Black trans people released from Rikers Island. Now, with $1 million, they could finally realize their dream of buying a full building. In November, they finally did, a 3-story walk-up in Woodhaven, Queens, with 11 units. In June 2020, right as the campaign was reaching its goal, something like 15,000 people showed up to the Brooklyn Liberation March to demand justice for violence against Black trans women. Ceyenne Doroshow stood at the balcony of the Brooklyn Museum, overlooking this crowd of thousands, to give this incredible speech, which almost made me cry. Due to the pandemic, I couldn't travel home to New York in the summer, which was my plan. But knowing that so many friends, lovers, and comrades were celebrating this moment, both in the crowd and socially distanced on the internet, made me feel less alone. That speech still holds a prominent place in my heart but since I think it only exists on Instagram, it already risks becoming ephemera. Back when I lived in Brooklyn, I curated music at venues, hired DJs at bars, sometimes DJed my friends' bars, as was customary in the community. And one night I remember coming home early from a Black Lives Matter march in order to work sound for a show. Initially, I felt guilty because my work was not as outwardly political as I was worried it should have been. But soon I realized that the bill was for a band that centered Black and trans voices, and the room held so many loved ones sharing space and community. This was the work as well. In her vital book, Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown writes that it is the artist's job to make the revolution irresistible. I've returned to this idea often, just as I've returned to music and gathering as a way to keep people inspired when the work feels hopeless. I deeply believe in the power of queer dance parties, especially ones that double as fundraisers, of citational remixes, of building community on sweaty dance floors. To honor that, I made this remix of Doroshow's speech, featuring music from trans and gender nonconforming artists, some of whom I have had the honor of working with. It includes SOPHIE, Leith, Abdu Ali, Sylvester, and Skyshaker, and more. I want to note that as a white trans person making this mix, it is my goal to center and uplift Black trans voices and not to inhabit these subjectivities. And I encourage everyone to buy these artists' records and to donate to Glitz if you can. And now I hope you will join me in celebrating Doroshow and Glitz. In abolitionist work, victories can unfortunately be few and far between, and a one like this deserves to be celebrated. Thanks for coming.
For every girl that died, the police need to be ashamed of themselves. For every time we had to bury one out, they need to be ashamed of themselves. I am now creating housing for Black trans women. For Black trans men. For the whole community. But the key is our key. We have never had equity in the city of New York. Yeah. Motherfuckers, we do now.
Gotta get it while I'm alive. Gotta get it while I survive. I move like clockwork. Military high. Gotta get it while I'm alive. Gotta get it while I survive. I move like clockwork. Military high.
On Sunday, my white allies and my Black allies said they were gonna raise money for me. In New York City, I want y'all to know we damn near sitting on $1 million. We're still raising money, motherfuckers. We damn near sitting on $1 million.
Gonna make it really hot.
This is what Black power looks like. This is what trans lives look like. You're looking at a Black international whore, baby. If you can smell me right now, y'all would know I smell like good pussy.
I don't dance, I work.
Every one of these babies, you see behind me, and these babies down here and back there. I love you. Love you. Love you. I love you. Love each other. I want you bitches to live.